Are you soldering HDMI ports on games consoles or wrong? That is the question. So my name's Dakota, I'm an electronics technician and I perform component level repair on motherboards such as games consoles, laptops, MacBooks, that sort of thing. But I also teach people how to do it on YouTube. So if you are new to the channel, don't forget to get subscribed, turn on the bell notifications so that you don't miss any future videos. But one of the things that I see quite often when I watch other people perform HDMI repairs, for example, on a console, so for example on a PS4 Slim, there's a much easier way. The one thing that I see people do, and I think it is a mistake, is they use one of these things. They use a nozzle while they're actually removing the port. And the reason that I think this is wrong, and I think that people should change the way that they do it, is because this restricts airflow. So obviously when you've got a nozzle, for example, you've got one of these, you've got some wider nozzles like that, or for example, you've got a nozzle on this hot air station right here. This is an angled nozzle. This is a really, really good nozzle, but it's not good for actually soldering HDMI ports. It restricts the airflow and it limits the amount of surface area where you can heat up with the hot air, as opposed to just using the handle or the hot air wand itself. So that's what I think people are doing wrong, and I'm going to give you a couple of examples in this video. I've got two motherboards in front of me. Both of them are PlayStation 4 Slim motherboards. They're fairly thin, the PS4 Slim, but the one common thing with these, or the one reason I've chose these boards, is because both of these have never had a repair on the HDMI circuit, which means that from factory they've both got the lead-free solder, which is a higher melting temperature than leaded. So I thought this would make a good example, because this is kind of like a real-world situation. I mean, if we really wanted a real-world situation, we'd install FIFA on these boards and then we'd kick them across the room in a fit of rage when we can't score a goal against the opposing team. But that being said, these are a real world situation because they've got lead-free solder, they haven't had any prior repair attempts done, and there's not going to be any skewed results while I'm showing you the examples and my preferred technique. I'm not saying it's necessarily wrong, but I just think there's a better way to do it. So like I say, I've got two motherboards here. These are, of course, donor boards. They are part of my donor board collection. And believe me, I have a lot of donor boards. But the one common denominator here is the HDMI circuit, like I said, hasn't been touched. So we've had no rework around the HDMI port itself. We've had no rework around the HDMI encoder and things like that. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples. Let's pop under the microscope. So we've got board number one here. So this is going to be the one that I'm doing with a nozzle. I'm going to use a normal straight nozzle because you can't get angled nozzles for every hot air station. So I think a straight nozzle is going to be a more realistic example of the issues that you're going to run into, that I feel you're going to run into when using one of these things. So this is an average size nozzle. Yeah, insert innuendo here, but this is an average size nozzle. And I don't know exactly what size it is, but yeah, it's about normal. It's about what everybody uses. So yeah, let's pop this onto the hot air station, and I'm going to use a modest 440 degrees Celsius of hot air, and I'm going to go for 40% airflow. So I think that'll be a fairly good example. And a lot of the time, what people tend to do as well is they use flux when removing it. I think this is a complete waste of time removing the port with flux, because it's just going to fly everywhere, and to be honest, you're not really trying to save the solder because you're going to need to retin it anyway, right? So I think that's a little bit of a waste of time, but that's not the purpose of this video. So 440 degrees Celsius, 40% airflow, that's a realistic temperature. What I've found is the average. And what people will tend to do is they will tend to move the hot air around, but like I said, the nozzle is very restrictive. It's great for focusing in one area, so for example the caps and stuff around here, the filters, but what they tend to do is they tend to try and remove the port like this, We're going to see how long this is going to take me. So 440 degrees Celsius. I'm going to try not to tear the pads on this, which means I want a realistic example, you know, where we're actually trying to be careful. And if we were removing this port, you know, to replace it for a customer, then we wouldn't really care about melting it, right? So we're going to just remove this with heat. It's starting to come loose. Obviously we're not going to rip it straight up, we don't want to damage it. And that's about ready to come up now. In fact, no, it's not. So you see the issues I'm running into here already. As it's getting ready to heat up, not everything is melting, right? So that took quite a while. I mean, relatively speaking, as opposed to the technique that I use without the nozzle. So that took quite a while. It melted the port, and yeah, we just, you know, we just ran into a couple of problems there. The solder on the ground legs was cooling down before the solder on the pins was actually, you know, heating up, and it wasn't all molten at the same time. It took a little while to distribute the heat across the entire port. And that's obviously a problem, because if the solder that's on the ground legs melts first, there is a good chance that you're going to damage pads on the HDMI port itself. So what we want to do is we want to be able to heat up this entire area. And when you consider, you know, the size of a HDMI port, that's quite a large area. We want to heat this up all at the same time, evenly, so as when these ground legs are melted, these pads here, which have got a smaller surface area, have already been melted for quite some time, right? Because we don't want to rip these pads. These ground legs here, or these ground pads here, who cares if we damage these a little bit? I mean, realistically speaking, I mean, we try not to, but realistically speaking, if you damage these ground legs a little bit, you're not going to hurt the console. You're not going to have to do any more work to get it working. You know, if you scratch away a little bit at the conformal coating on the board, or, you know, you dig into it a little bit, it's not that big of a deal. But tearing these traces is. Now, I know I didn't tear the traces, but that is a reason that a lot of people do tear traces, because these ground legs are heated up before this area here, these pins. And what people tend to do is to see the port wobbling around because there's no structural support anymore because of the ground legs being melted. So they lift up on the port, and unfortunately these are not melted, so up come the pads. And that's obviously a problem, because then you've got to do trace repair, or you've got to get someone to do trace repair if you're not capable of doing it. So that's obviously a big problem. So let's show you the other example. So we've got port number 2 here. Again, you can see this is factory solder. If we look on the bottom, I haven't touched this at all. I haven't messed with it. I haven't put any leaded solder anywhere. I'm not trying to skew the results. This is a genuine real world test. The only thing different is because of the heat in the hot air, this board's a little bit warm on the bottom here. So I am going to pause the video for a second and give it a little while just to cool down back to room temperature. And that should do it. So the magic of editing. So like I said, real world test, the board is now pretty much exactly the same temperature as the other one, and even if it wasn't, it's the other side of the board which is warm, not this side. This side didn't get any heat at all, so it's not going to skew the results. But like I said, one of the mistakes I think people make is using a nozzle. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hover the board over the edge of the table. So let's just show you everything at once here. So hot air's there. You should be able to see it. You might have to zoom in or whatever, but you should be able to see it. I'm going to pull that out a little bit anyway because I need a little bit more length on my tube. Wink, wink. Anyway, enough of the dad jokes. So, like I said, I'm going to heat up from underneath the board. So here's where my hot air is. It's a little bit of a stretch with the position of my hot air. I don't have to pull my hot air station out that often. I don't do that many ports, not really. So, you know, it's all about positioning, but unfortunately my hot air station is set pretty far back, so I do have to pull it out a little bit. You can't actually see that screen, so let me just move it across a little bit so I can turn the hot air. There we go. So that you should be able to see it, but probably not. So I'm going to heat up from here. I haven't touched my hot air. It's still at 440 degrees Celsius. But you watch how long this takes now. I'm actually restricting my airflow a little bit, but as opposed to last time, this is going to smoke a bit because I've got I forgot to remove this foam. Stupid foam. Get off. So I'm heating up the board evenly right now. Done. Absolutely done. Right. And that took half the time. I know time really doesn't come into it. You don't really want to be rushing repairs, but the quicker you can get this done, believe me, over the space of a day. Let's say you was doing these all day, every day, and I do know shops that just do HDMI ports, and they're busy as hell. You know, their technicians really don't stop all day. They constantly one after the other. You know, I could get a production line going here. I could have 5 boards across here. Someone else taking the consoles apart. Bang, 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 done. 5 ports, 10 minutes. It really does make a difference, believe me. It does make a difference. I'm going to put them back on now. I'm going to show you the differences between putting it back on with hot air with the nozzle and putting it back on with hot air without the nozzle. And I'll show you the differences in speed there. So this board that I've just taken the port off, that should now be cool enough to the point where it's back to room temperature. So I can show you a realistic example, and then by the time I've done that one, this one will have cooled down enough to be able to work on that as well. So like I say, this is the board that I first worked on, and again I want to do a realistic example here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some leaded solder on, because that's what we would do in the real world. So I'll add some flux. I'm going to have to grab another donor port off off another donor board as well. And by the way, look at the difference. So this was the one that I've just taken off, and this was the one that I took off this board. This is a donor port. Look how good that looks. I mean, apart from a little bit of melted foam on there because I forgot to remove it, look at how good that port looks. That port is absolutely still reusable. You know, if you haven't got a port or something, you can take that, you can salvage that, drop it onto another console, nothing wrong with it. Give it a little bit of a clean up with some isopropyl alcohol and a brush, and you've basically got yourself a brand new port. And there are times where I do come unstuck, where I've run out of ports and I didn't realise, so I've had to take one from a donor board and things like that. This one, can you really reuse this? Let's have a look inside. Of course you can't, because it's all melted, and that is another problem. You can't use that port. That is absolutely wamboozled. So yeah, that is another plus for no nozzle, right? It's absolutely mint. Absolutely mint. Not a single issue with that port at all. No melting, nothing. Just a little bit of singeing around the actual metal case of the port, and that's it. But yeah, there you go. There's another realistic example. But let's add some leaded solder to this, and then I will give you an example of doing this with the nozzle as opposed to doing it without. So let's add a little bit of leaded solder first. I can always touch these up in a little minute. In a little while. Yeah, it's nearly 4 AM. In fact, I think it's after 4 AM. Dedication to the cause, that's what it is. There we go. So we've got some leaded solder now. And if you want to get really technical, we can do it on the back as well. So if we flip the board around and we go to where the HDMI port is, we can add some flux. And the one thing that I do notice people doing with these when they are putting the port back on is they do tend to heat up from underneath, because, well, otherwise you're going to melt the port, right? And yes, you could remove it from underneath, but it's going to take you longer because you've got to transfer the heat through the board. So it's going to take you even longer than it would to melt the port. I'm going to make sure we've got a nice mixture of leaded solder here. That's just going to lower the melting temperature for us. There we go, that's beautiful. And again, I've got the board on the edge of the table because we're going to need to get underneath it to drop that port in. I'm probably going to struggle with this, by the way, because I'm not used to doing it this way. So this is the one time where an angled nozzle really does come in handy for doing HDMI ports, because if you want to do it with a nozzle, then you can still get underneath and actually be able to drop it on, or you can come side on. Actually, I'm going to flip the board around and try and do this so that I can see the pins. I am going to have to pull my hot air right the way out though for this. So I'm going to start to heat up. Ow! Whoops, that weren't meant to happen. Yeah, so because I basically couldn't heat everything up evenly, I was struggling to actually get the port to sit down flat. So I'm going to have to try that again. I'm using the melted port now because that port is going to be way too hot for me to pick up. So the solder just wasn't melting all the way through, that was the problem. Okay, so I did manage it, just about. Give it a wiggle, there we go, good. So we managed to get that on, just about. I did burn myself doing it though. Now that's sitting down nice and flat, and honestly I'd call that a win. Right, it's, you know, the port is on there, but it was difficult. It was very difficult to do. The port is sat down flat, and well, some of the pins are not soldered properly, but then you would just run over it with the iron. You wouldn't need to worry too much about that. It's sitting flat enough to the point where you can actually run over it with the iron and tin the pads themselves. I did use the melted port for that though, by the way, but that's fine. So let me bring this one back into play then, and I'm going to do the exact same thing. So like I said, I want to keep this as fair as I possibly can. I want to make sure that we've got a nice even test here, because it is nice to, you know, for some confirmation as to whether your techniques are as effective as they could be. You know, you want to make sure that you're doing as good of a job as you possibly can, which is probably the reason why you're watching this video anyway. So yeah, same scenario, leaded solder, make sure that everything's nice and low melt sort of thing. I don't know where I was going with that, but never mind. So we'll add some leaded solder. Make sure it's all nice and mixed in. Same with the leaded solder on the pins. Whoops, well, I weren't meant to hit those there, but hey, it's later, right? I'm getting rather tired. Alright, there we go. And same scenario as well. We're going to do the back of the ground legs as well. So the solder actually started to come through on this one. The reason I've chose this board as an example is because I think personally I would really struggle using the other technique, you know, with the nozzle on a thicker board. So we get a bit of burnt flux from the factory because they never get cleaned up 100%. That's what that black stuff is. We'll make sure that we've got some nice shiny joints here. There we go, beautiful. And I've managed to retrieve my other port now, so that's good. And again, I'm going to use the exact same method. I'm going to hover it over the edge of the table so as I can actually get underneath the board and heat up from underneath. But I'm going to remove the nozzle. That's a little bit too hot. Yeet! Okay, so like I said, I'm going to heat up from underneath. Just hold the hot air directly underneath the port. It's going to distribute the heat nicely and it's going to melt everything at the same time. Okay, so with no nozzle, absolutely no nozzle. So just so you can actually see it here, and so you know I'm not using a nozzle. Well, I'm going to try and show it on the camera. I've only got so many, so much field of view, but yeah, you can very clearly see that I'm not using a nozzle here, and just watch how quick this heats up. Boom, nice and even. And there we go. Seconds. Absolute seconds. And honestly, when I use this technique, I can do a HDMI port start to finish, including disassembly and reassembly and testing, in less than 20 minutes. Less than 20 minutes, and I can do that. That just comes down to experience more than anything. It comes down to practice and, you know, getting that technique down to a fine art. And it's the same with any technique. It doesn't matter what technique it is. If you get it down to a fine art, if you really master that technique, you can do it really, really quickly. But I really do just feel like this is a much quicker method and safer. I can take that port off 50 times and I probably still wouldn't melt it. I'm not going to try and do that because that's just a waste of time, but there you go. Let's have a look at it. So back on the desk here, and that actually sits way flatter. So that already seems flatter to me. I'm not sure if we're going to have any issues with the pins. Let's have a look. Solid. Solid. Yeah. Good. Okay. And it looks like this might be a successful port swap. Or rather, in terms of the soldering, this board don't work, it's completely dead, but yeah, that is what I call the perfect port replacement. Absolutely solid on every single pin. So yes, it's a little bit slanted, you know, it's further forward this side than it is this side, but you know, with a little bit of practice, I mean, I'm just messing around here. With a little bit of practice, you can get that to drop on perfectly every single time. Let's show you one more example, or one more view of it while I'm actually on the side camera. So again, I have a factory port on another PS4 Slim donor board. Let's remove this foam this time, because otherwise it's going to stink the workshop out, and whew, I'll stink enough. So yeah, there we go. But let's just show you this side on so you can see everything. So again, leaded solder, or sorry, lead-free solder. And this is in real time as well. Ports off. Add some flux. Yes, I should be using a fume extractor, but it kind of ruins the audio. It's a little bit awkward because of my hot air's in the way. It wouldn't normally be there. You see, normally if I was doing this off camera, I'd have the board further over this side so I could actually get to it without moving the hot air out as far. But yeah, you know, it is what it is, I suppose. It's part of the job. Whoops, that's not. Okay, back on with the hot air, no nozzle. Notice I didn't put any leaded solder on the bottom this time. It's not really needed. You know, I can always touch that up afterwards if I needed to. Damn it. Okay, if you watch my last video, you'll see I have random involuntary movements. That was one of them. There we go. That port's done. That quick. Let's have a look under the scope. There you go. That was absolutely gorgeous. Look at that. That's a beautiful port swap. That was better than the first one. Well, second. All solid by the looks of it. And that could literally be it as well. You know, you pull the port off, you run the soldering iron over. No microscope. No nozzle. No problems. And it could be absolutely perfect every single time. That's what happens when you get the technique down. You have a look at the bottom. You technically don't even need to touch those joints up. Just literally clean up this burnt flux and away you go. You know, run your tweezers over there, give it a little bit of a scrub with some isopropyl alcohol, and you're good to go. But is it melted? Of course it's not. Of course the port's not melted, because we're not focusing the heat in one specific area. Like I said, I could pull this port off 50 times and it would probably still be absolutely fine. I don't like to do that, but I've had to do it in the past where I've got no port left and I've had to take it off multiple times because I've got something stuck inside the ground legs or something like that. So, are you doing ports all wrong, or do you do it the way that I think is the best and most effective way? That's not me saying that my method is better than anyone else's. It's not me saying that, you know, I'm better than anyone else. That's just a technique which I've found really is effective. It's called the drop method, or rather that's what we've dubbed it as in the YouTube and technician scene. But basically, pull it off, drop it back on. Really, it's that simple. So that's going to be for now. If you do have any comments or questions, leave them down in the comment section down below. I'll always do my best to answer. If you do want to see more of these videos, don't forget to subscribe, turn on the bell notifications. That way you don't miss any. You get notified when I go live, and you get notified when I upload a video as well. If you do want to support me, there'll be some links in the video description to Patreon, and you can also follow me over on Twitch. Become a Twitch Prime subscriber, And if you do need parts and supplies for games consoles and laptops, check out the website consolefix.shop. You can buy all of the parts that you might need. If I don't have them on the store, get in touch and I'll happily find them and list them at a reasonable price, cheaper than eBay. So that's going to be it for now. Thank you very much for watching. I really do appreciate it. Until next time, see you later. Bye for now.